Hello, my name is Roy Poyan, and I am the Director of Families Impacted by Opioids. I want to thank you for joining us for this next episode of Fentanyl and Families in Harm's Way. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at enabling versus consequences. This is a very big topic. It's probably one of the most universally known but misunderstood areas of the family and their role in dealing with creating a successful environment for recovery. If the family is performing in a way that is functional and they're using their functionality to contribute to the family dynamic in a positive and selectively identifying their potentiality to make contributions, then that's great, okay? That's a big expectation of a lot of individuals doing the right thing all the time, and that's probably unrealistic. So with that in mind, we need to be understanding of what the family is doing. And what I wanted to mention that before we got into the different types of enabling, because this is not a matter of blaming somebody in the family. Hey, you're doing this, you need to stop it, shame on you. That's not healthy, okay? But identifying that this is the situation, we see it impacting the family, we have a solution we've determined for the situation, we've developed a decision, and we designed a plan of action on how we will deal with this enabling by this person's brother or sister or mother or father. So with that in mind, it's the family members, other than the one that's misusing substances, that we're addressing in the area of this topic. Let's take a look real quickly at the closer examination of which types are involved. There basically are 10, and I'll just quickly read them off for you. Denial is one of them. Justification is another. You're justifying their using. Allowing substance use. You're allowing it in the home. It's okay, we'd rather see him upstairs than out on the streets using. Suppressing your feelings. I'd like to tell him how I feel, but I'm not going to. He might get upset, or it might cause him to start using drugs more. That's enabling. The area of avoiding the problem. So if I don't bring it up, then maybe it'll go away. That's enabling. Protecting the family image. You're making excuses and reasons for why these behaviors are being presented and why the family is impacted in a certain way in order to protect the image as it is seen by others. And then maintaining the situation, minimizing the situation, and that's primarily saying, well, it's not so bad. It's not the same as justification, because in justification, you're identifying the situation. In minimizing, you're identifying with the person, and you're saying, it's only marijuana. I mean, really, how bad could it be? At least he's not using heroin. Well, you've often heard it said it's a gateway. The way that marijuana is set up now, and the intensity, it is a gateway. This is not the old marijuana we were smoking back in the 70s. This is a completely different game now. Playing the blame game. You know, if Jack didn't hang out with those kids, he wouldn't be in the situation. Or if his mother didn't buy him alcohol when he was 16, he wouldn't be an alcoholic now at 19, 21. So, assuming responsibilities, I'm going to make sure that he gets to work on time. I'm going to make sure his bills are paid. I'm going to. When you're using the word I'm going to, there's an indication that you may want to take a look at what followed that word, because more than likely you're assuming their responsibilities or the responsibilities of somebody else in the family. And then controlling behaviors, and that might sound something like, if you don't change or if you bring that into here, I'm going to kick you out and everything with you goes to the streets. That's kind of controlling behavior, and just so you know, you're not going to get the kind of change that you're looking for. We'll talk about that in family intervention when we discuss the 5 stages of change. For right now, your controlling behavior will only create a flashback. That flashback creates a diversion for them not to do what it is that you're trying to get them to do. you are enabling them because you're giving them an environment of confrontation, which is perfect for them, because then you're off your game and they're the ones that are in control. We'll learn more about this, and I think that it's of value for us to take time. Why don't you come on over to the family table? Let's sit down and let's see how your family is dealing with enabling. We'll identify each of the family members and see what type they may be. Don't be surprised if you see several of these being used by one person, or each person using a different one. It's important that we identify this because this is the environment of which this person is trying to maintain control of their life in a successful recovery environment. If we're enabling them in a bad way, then that's counterproductive, and they probably will relapse.
I'm going to shut this window and you can start whenever you're ready.
Thank you for joining us for this next section of our episode, Enabling versus Consequences. It's an interesting concept of dialogue with ourselves. When we start to look at enabling, we tend to think, well, it's something that we're doing outside of ourselves. We're doing it with somebody. After all, we're enabling them. And really the first thought that we'd like you to take a look at is that you are kind of maturating what is needed in order to enable based on something inside yourself. So sometimes somebody will use allowance as one of the enabling types, and it actually comes from them thinking about, well, if this were me and I wanted to use it, how would I try and find a way that, you know, I could fit this in so that it's accepted, and yet I get to kind of achieve what I want to achieve. And so we look at this other person's situation and we kind of mold and model an environment of allowance. So let's take a look at what exactly it is that we're talking about, because we've already identified that there are 10 types. And really what we need to determine is, let's talk about the behavior of enabling and some of the finer points that are discussed here in the study guide. The enabler protects the addict from natural consequences, and that's an important concept to consider, because it makes you wonder, well, why would they do that? And that's really the underlying factor of when an enabler goes for therapy, them and the therapist will take a closer look at. So why are you protecting the person who's experiencing addiction from the consequences that are needed for them to realize that this is not working out and they need to change what it is that they're doing? They keep secrets about the addict's behavior from others. So they may see something and they don't want the others to know about it. That makes them an enabler. It makes excuses for the addict's behavior with teachers and friends, legal authorities, employers. He just slept in late last night, from being out late last night. He'll get to work on time in the future, you know, and they're making these excuses for them, or bails them out of trouble. You know, hey, I love you and I'll be there for you. And this is my way of identifying myself in our relationship as providing something of value and worth. And it's like, oh, time out now, because it's not helping. You're enabling them, but you probably are not aware of that. So in all, you know, to be truthful, they're actually doing this with the thought that this really is what they should be doing. Hopefully with these studies, they'll realize that, you know, this is counterproductive. They're not achieving what they think they're achieving. So then they tend to blame other people. Well, you know, if you didn't do this, he wouldn't have done that. Or, you know, if he had more money, he'd be able to afford an apartment, which puts him in a better environment than the people that he's living with right now. So they tend to blame others and blame situations instead of putting the onus on the person. They're responsible for their situation and the choices that they make, good or bad. They own that. So they see the problem as a result of something else, something that might have been synthesized, or he came from a broken home, or he had an abusive parent. These are then kind of like played out into stories and themes that are basically enabling. They avoid the addicts by trying to keep peace. So if I bring up that he's addicted, then everybody's going to start arguing, and let's just avoid the topic altogether and keep the peace. Well, that's enabling. Gives them money. I mean, that's such an obvious one. And you sit there and you think, well, of course they shouldn't do that. You cannot count the number of times that we enable the people that we love by giving them money for reasons that we think are genuine, but then are used in a way that we kind of know inside of our hearts of heart that it may be used to purchase the substance that we don't want them using. So now we're dealing with that, in terms of we become the bank that bankrolls this. Attempts to control that which is not within their ability to control. I'm going to make them do this. No, you're not. I can assure you, you're not. Okay, and that's not even your role to make them do this, because you're sitting there saying, because if they did this, they would be healthier, better off. There's lots of reasons to justify to yourself why you feel that way. But the fact of the matter is, only they can make themselves do something. You can make yourself do something that influences them, but you can't make them, per se, do something. So in terms of caretaking, sometimes we tend to take on them taking care of themselves, and we make it our responsibility. Let's go back and revisit these 10 different types of enabling. There's denial. And in denial, once again, we're looking at the primary behavior being one where the loved one is basically refusing to accept that this person, their reality is that they are in addiction. And they think that it's just going to pass. They think that it's situational or environmentally related. You change those, you change the addiction. And they don't see, as we reviewed, that substance use disorder becomes very quickly a brain disease. So it's not going to pass, and it's going to be with them chronically now for the rest of their lives. Justification. Sometimes people will say, it's okay that he drinks a little because he works hard, or he's got under a lot of stress, or somebody had just passed in his life and he's dealing with a traumatic experience. And this is a normal way in their mind and justifying their behavior. That's enabling. So we may think we're being kind and understanding when really we're being coercive to a successful lifelong recovery. And allowance. You know what? I've heard it many times. And a parent will say, well, I'd rather they use in the house than down in a crack house or on the street where they could get harmed or they could get arrested. It's better that they do it here. That's enabling. Okay, no matter how you want to slice, dice, or cut it, that person is enabling that person. They're making it easier for them to use without the consequences that would normally be available to help them to make a change, force them to see what they're doing is not good for them. So suppressing feelings. When we suppress our feelings about how this is happening, you turn around and you say, well, I don't want to suppress my feelings, but if I do this, then they're going to turn around and say, oh my gosh, I've set off the whole firestorm. This is my fault. So I'd rather just not say anything at all. That's very important that you do say something. Now, if you need help in figuring out how to say it, that's a different situation to consider for the person. But to sit there and say you're not going to because you're afraid of creating trouble or anger or the way that they'll respond, that suppression is enabling. And they see it in you, by the way. They know how to get you to suppress your feelings if they're that type of enabler. They know how to get you into justification. They're very manipulative. They understand this because they got a stake in the fact that you will act this way. They're looking for any margin of relief that they can get to help them to create an environment without consequences. And so the other area is avoiding the problem. avoiding the problem is different from suppressing the feelings. In avoiding the problem, you're basically saying that I am not going to accept that this problem exists because of their addiction. It's because of something else. Well, that's silly, because you more than likely know that this problem is generated in this scenario, this case. It would be associated with their substance use disorder, and you're not admitting it. So you're allowing them that margin that they're looking for. Minimizing the situation, it really isn't that big a deal. And maybe if we don't make it a big deal, it'll go away. It's okay that he does it just a little. Or minimizing the situation might be, he talked about using again, but he said he's just going to do it once over the holiday. So I guess that's okay. Well, no, it's not okay. This could be the point when they overdose. They come back in at too high a volume, or it's laced with fentanyl, and it's a complete different scenario. There is no situation of minimizing this situation. So because you're looking at it and you're seeing it for what it is, don't minimize it. Accept it for what it is. Playing the blame game. We're almost saying you're an enabler is blaming, and we don't mean to, okay? We're bringing this to your attention. If one of these exists in any one of your family members or yourself, so that you would then be able to sit there and say, well, I'm enabling. Well, that doesn't mean anything. So what are you going to do about the fact that you're enabling? Well, I don't exactly know what to do. Well, what if we were to sit there and say, stop protecting the family image? Oh, well, that's different. That's something that I can really put my hands around, and, well, that's enabling. That's one of the 10 types. So you can kind of see, once we've identified which of the 10 types the enabling is, then we can put treatment and therapy behind that for ourselves so that we stop doing it. Often it's not the case of where you're going to sit there and say, I'm doing this and therefore I want to stop. Often it requires maybe 1 or 2 sessions with a professional, a sounding board, where you can kind of give it a little bit of life and some air to breathe so that you can see what it is that you're doing, and then proper responses can be made. So now we're going into the others, which are playing the blame game, of course, and then assuming responsibilities for them, okay? It's my job to make sure that he gets to work on time because we need the money as a family. Well, okay, you've logically said that correctly, but it's not your responsibility. It's their responsibility. And when you assume it, you relieve them from the consequences of not meeting their responsibility. Guess what? They will continue to let you do that. And they'll even add more to it if you will allow them to. And then there's controlling behavior. Controlling behavior kind of looks like, if you don't change, this is going to happen. And this is going to happen is pretty severe, typically. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to manipulate and control them. They'll flash back on that and make you feel guilty for kind of trying to control them. They've taken you completely off the topic, and now it's a you, me thing and not a me with my drug addiction thing. You always want to keep the focus and the spotlight on them as you start to make changes in how you might be using one of the 10 types of enabling. So let's not be ambiguous about that. Let's take a look by going into the seminar workbook, and let's turn to our page that actually discusses enabling versus consequences, and let's do the practical exercises. Yeah, that's right. We're going to actually go through every member of your family, okay, by creating a matrix and then determining, what's their behavior and what would you like to see, and then your action and then your outcome. We're not talking about the person that's using substances. What's their behavior is, what is the enabler's behavior? Okay, remember, we're trying to correct ourselves as members of the family so that we can create a more successful recovery environment for the ones that we care about. Now, there is a great video here on enabling, and I strongly recommend that you take the time to listen to Candace Platter discuss enabling. She's a very well-respected therapist in addiction in Canada, and that's why we chose it. In the next page on the worksheet, it's practical exercise. You'll see a list of 12 questions, and you actually score them. Just reading a couple of them. Do you take steps to cover up the addiction and keep it hidden? So you'd be reading that from never meaning 1, sometimes 3, and then often being 4. And then as you start to score these different questions, you would then total them. And that would give you an idea as to how much are we enabling. I mean, we're doing a little, we're doing a lot, and when you get to a lot, then okay, well, let's determine a solution. Let's develop a decision on how we're going to respond to this, and let's create a plan of action, which typically means getting a professional on board to talk to us of our identified enabling. Trust me, when you start to open up that can of worms, it's not a can of worms, but when you start to really look under the covers to see what it is that you're dealing with here, you may find that there are different types of enabling and not just the one that you initially discovered by yourself. So as you start to look at exercise number 2, we're asking you to kind of do a self-examination. In what way am I enabling? And what can I do to stop enabling? Well, these are the things that you really need to get down and dirty with. And they are very much appropriate questions for you to be addressing while you're working with a therapist or a drug counselor or a counselor who's familiar with the kind of like the concepts of enabling. It doesn't take a lot in therapy to kind of remove this from your regular way of how you cope and how you respond. Boy, it makes a world of difference. If there was one thing that we do in our society when it comes to addiction, and we're the people that are in this person's life, it's enabling. I can almost assure you. There is another area that's really critically important, and maybe you'll agree, maybe you won't, and that is boundary setting. So when you get to enabling and boundary setting, they kind of work together, but they're just two critical parts of when I am in this person's life, how can I bring the greatest amount of value? We'll stop enabling for one, and number 2, set up good boundaries and stick to them. And then that way they have a framework of what they can work with you on, and you make it a safer, kinder, more loving place for them to coexist in. And this really does start to create a pattern of them understanding their behavior to consequences too. So there's a lot of good things that come from you doing the work in enabling. As always, we strongly recommend that you take the time to do the 3D coping skills so that you have an opportunity to see what the solution, determine what it is, develop a decision, and design a plan of action. And then you'll want to find a resource in your community that can help to assist you in getting the right level of care for yourself so that you kind of it makes it quicker, easier to make these changes when you're being managed and coached by a professional that's in the field and knows exactly how to do this with you. I want to thank you for your time, and we hope that this was helpful for you. Hello, I want to thank you for continuing to view our episode. And we're now going to work into the area of the 3Ds. This is an important characteristic for the family to develop skills in. And we'll start by taking the time to look at an issue and then determine the issues based on the area of determining a solution, developing a decision, and designing a plan of action. By using your Module 3 workbook and going to a specific issue, you'll be able to find that the first step in that 3D skill set is the FTR, the Family Transformational Model. And the Family Transformational Model is a set-up way, each time the same way, that we will take 5 categories to look at in determining a solution. And each category is going to have 3 questions. So let's get started. The first is to define the issue. Naturally, we'll want to know what the issue is. The word issue is really problem, but we're saying the word issue is, the reason we're saying the word issue is it's just a little bit easier to digest, because it's not always a problem. Sometimes it's just something that's happening, and we need to determine a solution to it. The next question is, how does the issue impact the family? We need to know that. We need to know, we have an issue, that's fine. The issues can exist, but if it's impacting the family, in what way is it impacting the family? And then what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? That's very important for us to know. The fact is that this issue exists and it's impacting the family. We tend to believe maybe there was something we could have done to kind of get ready for it. And if there was, then we would want to have taken those steps, which is what all these episodes are about. And then who can help assist us and the family in our response? So we want to start to ask ourselves, we know that there's an issue, we know that it's impacting the family, and there are things that we could do to prepare for this, but we're probably going to need a resource, information, another person outside of our family, or maybe one of our family members specifically can use their functionality and contribute. So we want to identify that. And then what should the family expect as their outcome? And kind of a start with the end in mind thought, where we're saying, if we're going to do something, it's going to result in something. So is that result desirable? Is that really what we want? Because if we're going to create a solution, then we want the solution's outcome to be what we expect it would be. So in each of these categories that I just described, 1 through 5, there are 3 questions, and we're going to ask ourselves each of these. Let's go back into the first category, define the issue. Clearly state what happened or what will happen. We want to know very clearly what happened or what's likely to happen. And then write that down. Identify who's involved or who should be involved, and then what would you like to have happen or like to see happen. The third question in every category is going to be used. You'll see how in just a minute. But just remember, the third question in every category, so this question right here, the way you answer it, will be reused. Now the next question is, how is the issue impacting the family? Who in the family exactly is impacted? In what way are they impacted? And then the third question is, what is needed to move forward? And then the third category is, what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? The 3 questions again. What needs to be done? And then prioritize that list. Who needs to be involved? And then what will it look like, the third question, what will it look like when completed? Then the 4th category is, who can help and assist the family in their response? The 3 questions are, how to search and organize this organization to help you. In other words, it's not enough that you know you're going to go and introduce yourselves to a treatment center in your community. You want to start to determine, how do I look for them and organize my way of seeking help, because it might not just be that group alone. You may also need other services to kind of start to create a who can assist us. and it may be many different types of people. What to ask from them, and then what to expect. Remember the third question, what to expect. And then the fifth category is, what should the family expect as their outcome? Well, that has to do a lot with timing. And if it takes a certain amount of time, let's be realistic of what that is. That has something to do with the expense of the involvement, of getting involved in this issue. And then the third question being required changes, our changes as family members, for this response to successfully take place. Now, let's state what our solution is. Hey, this is the great news. You've already developed your solution. By answering each of these three questions, the third question in every category, you'll pull forward now into your statement. So your first sentence of your statement is the third answer in the first category. What would you like to have happen or like to see happen? Well, that becomes your first sentence. So what your first sentence for your solution statement is, what we would like to see happen is, and you just pull your answer from there to here. Do the same thing with the second category. How does the issue impact the family? Using the third question's answer, what is needed for the family to move forward? So now your second sentence is, what's needed to move forward is, and now you're accumulating these answers from these categories, the third question, and it's actually becoming your first sentence, your second sentence, your third sentence, your fourth sentence, and your fifth sentence in your solution statement. So your solution statement is going to sound something like, what we would like to see happen is, and what's needed to move forward will be, and then the third question from the third category, what it will look like when completed will be, and then what we expect will be, and then what's required for us to have a successful response is. Now those are your 5 sentences. You've just constructed your solution. And this is how you go about using a model for creating a solution. For any issue in life you have to face, you can use this as a way of approaching it. Now let's go to the other area, which is the second coping skill, making a decision. Let's make a value-based decision. Let's make a decision each time that kind of balances with what we value most. So first we want to determine, what are our values? Well, the best way to do that is to write down on a piece of paper, what types of things do you as an individual value most? And each member of your family can do this in a kind of a group exercise. And then once you've done that, I value love, I value honesty, I value relationships and sharing. These could all be an individual's 1, 2, 3. Then prioritize them. Which of the 1, 2, 3 is most important? Then have each member of the family do the same thing. And then you can sit there and say to the family, what was your number 1? What was your number 2? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? And then what was your 2? What was your 2? What was your 3? What was your 3? And where you start to see many people in the family say, well, my number 1 is relationships, my number 2 was trust, and my number 3 was love. Well, then you talk to another person, they say, well, my number 1 was love, my number 2 was personal expression or confidentiality, or so they mentioned something different, but they did mention love. And then the third member of the family happens to mention love also. You know now that love is a value of the family. So whatever decisions you make, you want to balance it on the fact of, does this disrupt our values? If it does, at least you know that it does, and to what degree. You're calculating that. But at least also you're including, what do we value most? Let's make sure our decisions don't counter that. And now, in the first step, we're going to identify exactly what's happened. And this is, by the way, in your book, okay? And it is for each of the episodes. Now, identify exactly what's happened, what happened, how did it happen, who did it happen to. Then the second step is analyze the situation, assess the problem, identify the problem, and in what areas did the problem create an impact. You're writing all of these down. the third step of that the third step in the decision-making model is what is the number of one contributing factor? What is causing this issue to take place? You need to know that before you make a decision. The fourth step is, now that you know the number one factor, you need to go out and find out what information there is about this. You know, your primary source, you're going to go to the actual person or organization that's involved with this and ask them, you know, what is this issue, and help us to understand it better. The secondary source would be somebody's telling you this happened, or somebody suggests that you should do something a certain way, and it's coming from somebody else other than the primary source. It could be an article, a clinical paper. These are all secondary sources, and you gather them and you make them part of your primary, secondary information gathering. The third area that you look at is your gut. What does your gut, because that's often where, you know, our faith comes in, and other things that are very important when making decisions get included. So trust your gut is what we're saying in the decision-making process. The fifth step in making a good quality decision is where you're taking a criteria and saying, let's take what we're going to make a decision about and let's balance it on the criteria to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. And this will ensure safety of your loved one. You know, is safety a part of what's being considered? And do we have the resources that are needed to do the decision we're looking at? And then, do we understand the timetable? Is it realistic? And do we understand the negative impacts? Because every decision has a positive and negative. Well, identify what the negative outcomes might be so that you can weight the factor of, is this a good decision? And then, would you do this if, would you ask others to do this if they were doing it for you? Meaning it was done for you or to you. Is this still a good decision? These are all areas that you want to take a look at. The third coping skill is in the area of the family plan of action. And everybody could say, well, Roy, listen, we're just going to go out and do it. Well, it's going to get done a lot more effectively. I want to warn you that the addiction industry is not organized. And then again, either is the family. So you're taking two disorganized organizations and you're putting them together. So a plan is a very good idea. The other factor is you're going to more than likely require the assistance of a lot of different groups. And as time goes by, those groups are going to change. And now it's a whole new set of groups that you're dealing with. When you're at the hospital, the ER, that's what that is. Then you move over to detox, that's what that is. Then you move over to therapy and treatment, and that lasts for 16 weeks. That's what that is. Then you're looking at sober living, recovery, maybe incarceration, and then reentry. On all that's involved in that. So there's all sorts of reasons why a plan put on paper based on the decision and the information gathering that you've made, based on the solution that you know you want to use, are very good ideas. It all comes together with the plan of action. Then you take the plan of action and you go find a professional to help you. Everything that we've done up to now is to position you to a place where you can be properly assisted and directed and supported. This is what's often missing in the families. This is what exhausts the families. This is where the families get into fights internally on. So, for that reason, we're going to apply the 3D coping skills. Determine a solution. We're going to develop a decision, and we're going to design a plan of action, and we're going to do it each time. I hope this is helpful for you. I'm confident it will be.